I'm Gina Davidovic, instructor at PM1 World Education. The topic for this session is Task 6, Scheduling. Schedule management includes everything required to manage the timely completion of the project. Planned schedule management is about establishing the policies and procedures for how to go about scheduling on the project. Define activities is about documenting and figuring out what are the actions to be performed in order to produce the deliverables. Sequence activities involves documenting the relationship between the activities. Estimate activity durations is about estimating or approximating the number of working periods each activity requires in order to complete. And finally, develop the schedule, puts everything together and analyzes the sequences, the resource requirements, the durations, all to put together a schedule baseline for approval. Then, once you've got all the plan completed, of course, the plans get approved, and then you need to control the schedule. You need to monitor against the baseline and take any corrective actions as necessary, depending on your performance. The key benefit of this process is that it gives you guidance and directions as to how the project schedule is going to be managed. The schedule management plan is a component of the project management plan and establishes how the schedule will be managed, controlled, and any policies and procedures. Considerations also involve thinking about the tailoring needs of your project. For example, the life cycle approach. If you're working using an agile life cycle versus a predictive life cycle, the scheduling approach will be different as well. Design activities is the process of identifying and documenting those actions that need to be performed by team members in order to produce the key deliverables of the project. The work packages are decomposed into activities, and these activities become the basis for more detailed estimates, scheduling, and also controlling the project at a more detailed level. The activity list are the actions or tasks, as some people might like to call them. Activity attributes extend the description of the activity by possibly adding a characteristic, sometimes location, for example. It can be used for selecting, ordering, sorting the activities into reports, especially when you have a long list of activities. Sequencing activities is about documenting the relationships between activities so that you have a network diagram, which is a logical sequence of the work. This precedence diagramming method, as it's called, can include different types of dependencies. You can have mandatory dependencies that are legally or contractually required. That could also be related to physical limitations of the work. Something has to be done before something else can be done. You can also have discretionary dependencies, which are sometimes referred to as preferred or preferential logic. These are based on best practices and can be useful when you need to overlap activities to shorten the schedule. Sometimes preferential dependencies can be shifted. External dependencies involve our relationship between project activities and non-project activities. Usually these dependencies are things that are outside of the project team's control. Internal dependencies are simply dependencies between project activities that are within your control. Activities in this network diagram are being shown in a finish to start linkage. Finish to start, one activity needs to finish before the next one starts. This is the most typical and most common way of relating activities together. Activity durations are the working periods. They don't include weekends, vacations, anything like that, just working periods. There are a number of ways of estimating. Some of the most common ways that are tested are included here. Analogous estimation is when you estimated an activity based on historical data from a similar activity that has been done in the past. It can be very fast, but it's not always that accurate. Bottom-up estimation is the most accurate, but is also the most time-consuming. It involves breaking down an activity to its lower units, smaller units, and then rolling this up to the activity level. Parametric estimation uses a statistical relationship between historical data and other parameters. For example, if you know how many days it takes per so many square feet in construction or square meters in construction, that might help you estimate when you have a job to estimate, for example. It can produce, pretty good accuracy depending on the sophistication of the data built into this model. Not as accurate usually as bottom-up though. Now, what about if there's a fair amount of risk in the work? Well, the accuracy of estimation can be improved by considering risk and uncertainty. You can use a three-point estimate. The most typical three-point estimation method is known as the PERT estimate, also is known as a beta estimate. Now it looks at 3 points, which were most likely, optimistic, and pessimistic. As you can see, the most likely is being weighted by 4 times. So the formula being optimistic plus 4 times the most likely plus pessimistic, and all that divided by 6 gives you the PERT estimate. You can, of course, also use expert judgment if there's no other way to estimate, and even some of these estimates and estimation methods might even need the input of subject matter experts. Let's learn a little bit about developing the schedule and specifically about the critical path. You will not need to do any complex calculations or draw a network diagram during the PMP exam. You will, however, need to understand what the critical path is and possibly be able to find the critical path if they were to give you a diagram. So let's take a look. The critical path is the sequence of activities that basically represents the longest path through a project. It determines the amount that the project will take in terms of duration. On any network path, the schedule flexibility is measured by the amount of time an activity can be delayed or extended past its date without delaying the project finish date. This amount of time that an activity can be late before the end of the project is affected is known as total float. So on this diagram that you see on the screen, if you were to add up the durations of the various paths, the paths are the roads through this diagram from start to end, you will discover that the critical path's duration is 25. That is comprised basically of the activities that run right down the center, A, C, D, and E. Those activities are said to be on the critical path or critical path activities. So these activities have zero float, which means they have no flexibility. It is possible when you're running the project that some activities could even have negative float. That would mean that they're already running late. But generally, when you're planning, you don't plan to be late. So activities normally have either positive float, which means they have flexibility, or zero float, which means they do not have any flexibility. In this example, you can see that some activities have float. They can be a little bit late before they impact the end of the project. Activity B, for example, could be up to 10 days late before it impacts the end of the project. Activity F could be 19 days late before it impacts the end of the project. And this is because B, C, and F are all concurrent. So even if B and F finish early or finish on their earliest finish dates, they're going to have to sit and wait anyway because D still has to wait until C also finishes, and C is 20 days. So activity C, on the other hand, has zero float. Any delay to A, C, D, or E would be an instant delay to the project schedule. Although you will not need to do any complex scheduling questions or calculations for the exam, you should understand that in a network diagram, activities usually have 4 different dates. An activity can have the earliest it can start, the earliest it can finish, the latest it can start, and the latest it finishes. And the software usually behind the scenes is using all the calculations to determine the float activities have, which activities on the critical path, etc. As you can see by this diagram, if you take a look at activity A, for example, you can see that the late start and the early start are 1. So late start minus early start, 1 minus 1 gives you 0. That activity has 0 float. But if you took a look at activity B, you can see that the late start is 13 and the early start is 3. The earliest it can start is on day 3. The latest it must start by day 13 or else it's going to be late. So if you do 13 minus 3 gives you 10. So activity B has 10 days of float. So sometimes a schedule is too long and you need to compress it or make it shorter. There are 2 commonly known methods of shortening a schedule. One is called crashing and the other one is called fast tracking. These are schedule compression techniques. Crashing is a technique used to shorten the schedule duration for the least incremental cost. What we do with crashing is we generally add resources, and resources cost money. This can include overtime. Resources are not free. It could bring additional resources. Resources could be equipment, not just people. Or you can pay to expedite the delivery of things that are sitting on the critical path. Crashing, though, only works, of course, on activities that are on the critical path, where adding resources would shorten duration. Fast tracking is a technique where activities that are normally done in sequence can be done in parallel for at least a portion of the duration, if not entirely. This is sometimes used in order to compress the schedule. An example would be if you construct a foundation for a building before completing all the architectural drawings. Maybe some of them were needed for the foundation, but sometimes you overlap work. The problem with fast tracking is that it could result in rework and increased risk of quality problems. And fast tracking only works when activities can be overlapped. And of course, you need to take a look at which activities those are. Sometimes activities that have a discretionary dependency could be good candidates to start and look if you needed to overlap or fast track the work. Times when you're scheduling, you're allocating resources to the different activities, and your resource utilization might not be in the most optimized way when you first start. There's a couple of techniques for optimizing the resource allocation on projects. One such technique is called resource leveling. If you find that resources are overcommitted in certain periods, meaning they're allocated to more than 100% of their availability, you can adjust this schedule to remove those overcommitments. This is what resource leveling does for you. It can be used when shared or critically required resources are not available or are in limited quantities or are over-allocated. Now, what happens when I use resource leveling, usually it's a software function. Resource leveling will often, and usually does, cause the critical path to extend, to be longer. So in fact, any available float will be used first to level the resources. However, the critical path often gets longer if there's not enough float in the right time periods. You can see in this example that we removed the overcommitments, however, the schedule got longer. Another method to deal with resource optimization is called resource smoothing. There's a very important difference between resource leveling and resource smoothing. Resource leveling reduces overcommitments but extends the schedule. Resource smoothing creates a more efficient way of using your resources and does not extend the schedule. So resource smoothing works with the existing schedule, the existing critical path. Sometimes resource smoothing is useful when resources are fully booked to capacity in some periods of time, and then other periods they're very low in utilization. So you want a little bit of a better distribution, sometimes to meet certain predefined limits. Like maybe you don't want people allocated to more than 85% of their capacity. If you were to use the resource smoothing function, the effort is redistributed across the existing schedule, and the schedule critical path remains the same. Take a look at earned value management. Earned value management is a way to measure the performance of your project. It is often used for cost and schedule. We're going to take a look here at just the schedule portions of earned value management. Control schedule is the process of monitoring the status of your schedule, and one of the methods is using this mechanism. Now, on the current PMP exam, you're not expected to do many calculations, or any for that matter. However, you do need to understand earned value, and you need to understand the interpretation of the metrics. So let's take a look at an example. You'll see that there are two calculations. You can see, or two metrics. You can see schedule variance, SV, and SPI, schedule performance index. Now, how are those calculated, and where does the data come from? If you take a look at this example, you'll see that this is a very simple schedule. It's got 4 weeks and 4 tasks, 1 task per week. Each task has been budgeted to be $2,000. So each task has a budget of $2,000. The total for my whole project is $8,000 budget at completion. However, let's say we're at the end of week 3 right now, and we're monitoring the schedule or controlling the schedule. As of the end of week 3, if everything had been on track, if I was on schedule, I should have completed $6,000 worth of work, correct? That's the plan. Now, the plan is called PV, your plan value. That's the budgeted cost of the work I scheduled up to that period of time. And then we need to know what work got done, so we better find out percent complete. I've gone to the team members and I've asked them to give me a percent complete. And as you can see, task 1, chapter 1, is 100% complete. Chapter 2, 100% complete. Chapter 3, 50% complete. So let's take a look at how much credit, what percentage I can use. What credit can I give? Chapter 1 completed 100% of its value, so you get for full credit. So 100% of its value of $2,000 is $2,000, full credit. Chapter 2 also gets full credit. But chapter 3 is only halfway done, so they're only going to get half credit. So 50% of its $2,000 value is only $1,000. So cumulatively, I've earned $5,000 worth of work. Now, without doing the calculations, you can see that I should have done $6,000 worth of work as of today, but I've only done $5,000 as of today. So I've done less work than planned. If EV is less than PV, you're behind schedule. And that's what the metrics are shown. Now, the two formulas start with EV. Variances are minuses, subtractions. Indexes are divisions. So if we plug the numbers into our formulas, you can see that my schedule variance is negative $1,000. I'm behind schedule by $1,000 worth of work. My SPI is 0.83. This means I'm only going at 83% of the rate plan. I'm behind schedule. So variances that are below 0 that's bad, that's behind schedule. Indexes that are below 1, that's bad, that's behind schedule. Now, for your personal interest, not for the exam because they don't test this next part that I'm going to mention, for your own personal interest, you may want to read a little bit about something called earned schedule management. It's found in the PEM book. You can Google it. It's another way of looking at schedule earned value calculations, but it's a mechanism called earned schedule management. And it's a little bit more effective than this method, but so far, this is the one that gets tested. You might get a question where you require simply the interpretation of SPI or